Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind troubled with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems. The ones you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve while rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. Let my voice wash over you at a comfortable volume and allow yourself to be distracted from the stresses and worries that play on your mind. Whether you need help falling asleep or going back to sleep in the middle of the night, you can trust me to keep you company and help you to wake up tomorrow in a rested state. You may need to try out Sleepy Time Tales for a few nights to get used to this slightly strange idea, but I believe it will be well worth your while. I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So settle down, relax, and allow yourself to get lost in my telling of tonight's story. Before we get to tonight's reading, I'd like to ask for a few minutes of your time. Sleepy Time Tales is a listener-supported podcast. I can only keep it going, paying for the services and tools I use, and justify the time that I use on it, thanks to the generosity of listeners like you. So if you're finding Sleepy Time Tales useful, if it helps you to get a restful night and you would like to keep it going out to thousands of your fellow insomniacs, please consider supporting it on the Patreon at patreon.com/sleepytimetales. This is monthly support that helps me keep the lights on and also gets you fun bonuses based on your contribution level. So go along there, take a look, and sign up if you're interested. And if monthly is a big ask, which is completely understandable, you can make once-off tips through the tip jar on the website. And if you'd like to support the show without having to do so financially, you can just tell people about it. If you know someone who is struggling to sleep, tell them where to find Sleepy Time Tales and see if it helps them. And that's enough of that. Let's get on with tonight's reading, where we pick up with what seems like it might become an exciting chase through the streets of a medieval city. Return this week to Bellarion the Fortunate by Rafael Sabatini. He looked beyond her at the others crowding there, to meet glances that seemed to invite, to urge, and from one bloated face, which he recognized for Benvenuto's, came an eloquent wink, whilst the fellow jerked a dirty thumb backwards towards the door, in a gesture there was no misunderstanding. Then, as if Bellarion's sudden resolve had been reflected in his face, the press before him parted. Men and women shouldered and elbowed a way for him. He plunged forward. The company closed behind him, opening farther ahead, closed again as he advanced, and again opened before him, until his way to the door was clear. And behind him he could hear the young officer's voice raised above the din, in oaths and imprecations, urging his men-at-arms to clear away with their pikes, calling upon those other soldiers lounging there to lend a hand, so as to make sure, at least, of one of these two rogues. But that rascally company, it seemed, was skilled in the tactics the occasion needed. Honest men there may have been, and no doubt there were amongst them, but they were outnumbered, and moreover, honest though they might be, they were poor folk, and therefore so far in sympathy perhaps with an unfortunate lad, as not to hinder him even if they would not actively help. And meanwhile the others, making pretense of being no more than spectators, solicitous for the condition of the peasant who had been stabbed, pressed so closely about the officer and his men that the latter had no room in which to swing their pikes. All of this Bellarion guessed by the sounds behind him rather than saw. for he gave no more than a single backward glance at that seething group as he flung across the threshold, out of that evil-smelling chamber into the clean air of the square. He turned to the left and made off towards the cathedral, his first thought being to seek sanctuary there. Then, realizing that thus he would but walk into a trap, he dived down an alley just as the officer gained the tavern door, and with a view halloo started after him, his 2 pikemen and the other soldiers clattering at his heels. As Bellarion raced like a stag before the hounds down that narrow street of mean houses in the shadow of Lutpron's great church, it may well be that he recalled the abbot's parting words, Pax multa in cella, forest autumn plurima, and wished himself back in the tranquillity of the cloisters, secure from the perils and vexations of secular existence. This breathless flight of his seemed to him singularly futile and purposeless. He knew what he was running from, but not what he might be running to, nor indeed whether to run at all. And for escape, knowledge of the latter is as important as of the former. Had not instinct, the animal instinct of self-preservation, been stronger than his reason, he would have halted, saved his breath, and waited for his pursuers to overtake him. For he was too intelligent to wear himself in attempting to escape the inescapable. Fortunately for him, the instinct of the hunted animal sent him headlong forward in despite of reason. And presently there was reason too to urge him. This when he realized that, after all, his pursuers were not as fleet of foot as himself. Be it from their heavy boots and other contraband, be it from his greater youth and more Spartan habits of life, he was rapidly outdistancing them, and thus might yet succeed in shaking them off altogether. Then, too, he reflected that if he kept a straight course in his flight, he must end by reaching the wall of this accursed city, and by following this must gain one of the gates into the open country. It was close on sunset, but there would be at least a full hour yet before the gates were closed. Heartened, he sped on, and only once was he in any danger. That was when the straight course he laid himself brought him out upon an open square, along one side of which ran a long grey building, with a noble arcade on the ground level. There was a considerable concourse of people moving here, both in the open and under the arches, and several people turned to stare at that lithe green figure as it sped past. Caring nothing what any might think, and concerned only to cross that open space as quickly as possible, Bellarion gained the narrow streets beyond. Still intent upon keeping a straight line, he turned neither to right nor to left, and presently he found himself moving no longer between houses, but along a grass-grown lane, between high brown walls, where the ground underfoot was soft and moist. He eased the pace a little, to give his aching lungs relief, nor knew how nearly spent he was until the peace of his surroundings induced that lessening of effort. It lessened further until he was merely walking, panting now and gasping, and mopping the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. He had been too reckless, he now told himself. The pace had been too hot. He should have known that it must defeat him. Unless by now he had shaken off those pursuers, or others they might have enlisted, and that was his great fear. He was a lost man. He came to a standstill, listening. He could hear, he fancied, sounds in the distance, which warned him that the pursuit still held. Panic stirred his flanks again. But though it might be urgent to resume his flight, it was more urgent still to pause first to recover his breath. He had come to a halt beside a stout oaken door, which was studded with great nails and set in a deep archway in that high wall. To take his moment's rest, he leaned against these solid timbers. And then, to his amazement, under the weight of his body, the ponderous door swung inwards, so that he almost fell through it into a space of lawn and rose beds, narrowly enclosed within tall boxwood hedges, which were very dense and trimly cut. It was as if a miracle had happened, as if that door had been unlocked for his salvation by supernatural agency. Thus thought he in that moment of exaggerated reaction from his panic, nor stayed to reflect that in entering and enclosing and bolting that door, he was as likely to entrap as to deliver himself. There was a deep sill, some 2 feet above the ground, on the inner side. On this, Bellarion sat down to indulge the luxury of a sense of security. But not for very long. Presently steps, quick and numerous, came pattering down that lane, to accompaniment of breathless voices. Bellarion listened and smiled a little. They would never guess that he had found this door ajar. They would pass on, continuing their now fruitless quest, while he could linger until night descended. Perhaps he would spend the night there and be off in the morning, by the time the gates of the city should have been reopened. Thus he proposed. And then the steps outside came to a sudden halt, and his heart almost halted with them. He paused hereabouts, said a gruff voice. Look at the trodden ground. That was a shrew-eyed sleuth, thought Bellarion as he listened fearfully. Does it matter, quoth another. Will you stand pausing too whilst he makes off? Come on, he went this way, we know. Hold, numbskull. It was the gruff voice again. He came this way, but he went no further. Bah, please don't argue with me, man. Use your eyes. It's plain to see. No one has gone past this door today. He's here. And on the word, a heavy blow, as if from a pike butt, smote the timbers, and brought Bellarion to his feet, as if he himself had been struck. But this door is always locked, and he could scarcely have climbed the wall. He's here, I say. Don't argue. 2 men to guard the door, lest he come forth again. The rest with me to the palace. Come. His voice was harsh and peremptory. There were no further words in answer. Steps moved off quickly, returning up the lane. Steps paced outside the door, and there were as a mutter of voices of the men placed on guard. Bellarion wondered if prayer would help him. He could think of nothing else that would. Chapter 4. Sanctuary. These grounds into which he had stepped through that doorway in the red wall seemed, so far as the tall hedges of his hortus inclusus would permit him to discover, to be very spacious. Somewhere in their considerable extent there would surely be a hiding place, into which he could creep until the hunt was over. He went forward to investigate, stepping cautiously towards a deep archway cut in the dense boxwood. In this archway he paused to survey a prospect that evoked thoughts of paradise. Beyond a wide sweep of lawn, whereon 2 peacocks strutted, sparkled the waters of a miniature lake, where a pavilion of white marble, whose smooth dome and graceful pillars suggested a diminutive Roman temple, appeared to float. Access to this was gained from the shore by an arched marble bridge, over whose white parapet trailing geraniums flamed. From this high place the ground fell away in a flight of 2 terraces, and the overflow from the lake went cascading over granite boulders into tanks of granite, set in each of them, with shading vine trellises above that were heavy now with purple fruit. Below, another emerald lawn was spread, sheltered on 3 sides within high walls of yew, fantastically cut at the summit into the macholications of an embattled parapet and bearing at intervals deep arched niches in which marble statues gleamed white against the dusky green. Here figures sauntered, courtly figures of men and women more gaudy and glittering in their gay raiment than the peacocks nearer at hand, and faintly on the still, warm air of evening came the throbbing of a lute, which one of them was idly thrumming. Beyond, on the one open side, another shallow terrace rose, and upon this a great red house that was half palace, half fortress, flanked at each side by a massive round tower with covered battlements. So much Bellarion's questing eyes beheld, and then he checked his breath, for his sharp ears had caught the sound of a stealthy step just beyond the hedge that screened him. An instant later he was confronted by a woman, who, with something furtive and cautious in her movements, appeared suddenly before him in the archway. For a half-dozen heartbeats they stood thus, each regarding the other, and the vision of her in that breathless moment was destined never to fade from Bellarion's mind. She was of middle height, and her close-fitting gown of sapphire blue laced in gold from neck to waist revealed her to be slender. There was about her an air of delicate dignity, of command tempered by graciousness. For the rest, her hair was of a tawny golden, a shade deeper than the golden threads of the jeweled caul in which it was confined. Her face was small and pale, too long in the nose perhaps for perfect symmetry, yet for that very reason the more challenging in its singular, elusive beauty. Great wistful eyes of brown, wide-set and thoughtful, were charged with questions as they conned Bellarion. They were singularly searching, singularly compelling eyes, and they drew from him forthwith a frank confession. "Lady," he faltered, "of your charity, I am pursued." Pursued? She moved a step and her expression changed. The wistfulness was replaced by concern in those great somber eyes. "I'm likely to be hanged if taken," he added, to quicken the excellent emotions he detected. "By whom are you pursued?" "An officer of the captain of justice and his men." He would have added something more. He would have said something to assure her that in seeking her pity, he sought it for an innocent man betrayed by appearances. But she gave signs that her pity needed no such stimulant. She made a little gesture of distraction, clasping her long, tapering hands over which the tight, blue sleeves descended to the knuckles. She flung a swift, searching glance behind her, from the green archway to the open spaces. "Come," she said, and beckoned him forward. "I will hide you." And then, on a note of deeper anxiety, for which he blessed her tender, charitable heart, she added, "If you are found here, all is lost. Crouch low and follow me." Obediently he followed, almost on all fours, creeping beside a balustrade of mellow brick that stood breast high to make a parapet for the edge of a very spacious terrace. Ahead of him the lady moved sedately and unhurried, thereby discovering to Bellarion virtues of mental calm and calculating wit. A fool, he told himself, would have gone in haste, and thus provoked attention and inquiry. They came in safety to the foot of the arched marble bridge, which Bellarion now perceived to be crossed by broad steps, ascending to a platform at the summit and descending thence again to the level of the temple on the water. "Wait, here we must go with care." She turned to survey the gardens below, and as she looked he saw her blench, saw the golden brown eyes dilate as if in fear. He could not see what she saw, the glint of arms upon hurrying men emerging from the palace. But the guess he made went near enough to the fact before she cried out, Too late. If you ascend now, you will be seen. And she told him of the soldiers. Do you go first, she bade him, and on hands and knees. If I follow, I may serve as a screen for you, and we must hope they will not see you. The hope, said Bellarion, is slender as the screen your slenderness would afford me, lady. He was lying now flat on the ground at her feet. If only it had pleased heaven to make you as fat as you are charitable, I'd not hesitate. As it is, I think I see a better way. She stared down at him, a little frown puckering her white brow. But for the third time in that brief space, she proved herself a woman whose mind seized upon essentials and disregarded lesser things. A better way? What way, then? He had been using his eyes. Beyond the domed pavilion, a tongue of lands thrust out into the lake, from which 3 cypresses rose in black silhouette against the afterglow of sunset, whilst a little alderbrush, its branches trailing in the water, blunted the island's point. This way, said Bellarion, and went writhing like an eel in the direction of the water. Where will you go? She cried, and added sharply as he reached the edge. It is very deep, 2 fathoms at the shallowest. So much the better, said Bellarion. They'll be less likely to seek me in it. He took a succession of deep breaths to prepare himself for the long submersion. Ah, but wait, she cried on a strained note. Tell me at least. She broke off with a catch in her breath. He was gone. He had slipped in, taking the water quietly as an otter, and save for the wave that sped across the lake, no sign of him remained. The lady stood breathlessly at gaze, waiting to see the surface broken by his emerging head, but she waited vainly and in growing alarm. The moments passed. Voices behind her became audible and grew in volume. The men-at-arms were advancing swiftly, the courtiers following to see the sport their captain promised. Suddenly from the elder bush on the island's point, a startled water-hen broke forth in squawking terror, and went scudding across the lake, its feet trailing along the water into which it finally splashed again within a yard of the further shore. From within the bush itself, some slight momentary disturbance sent a succession of ripples across the lesser ripples whipped up by the evening breeze. Then all grew still again, including the alarms of the watching lady who had perceived and thus read these signs. She drew closer about her white, slender shoulders a little mantle edged with minever, and moved like one impelled by natural curiosity to meet the soldiers who came surging up the terrace steps. There were 4 of them, led by that same young officer who had invaded the hostelry of the Stag in quest of Lorenzaccio. What is this? The lady greeted him, her tone a little hard, as if his abrupt invasion of her garden was in itself an offence. What are you seeking here? A man, Madonna, the captain answered her shortly, having at the moment no breath for more. His sombre eyes went past him to dwell upon the 3 glittering gallants in the courtly group of 5 that followed at the soldiers' heels. A man, she echoed. I do not remember to have seen such a portent hereabouts in days. Of the 3 at whom the shaft of her irony was directed, 2 laughed outright in shameless sycophancy. The 3rd flushed scarlet, his glance resentful. He was the youngest by some years and still a boy. He had her own brown eyes and tawny hair, and otherwise resembled her, save that his countenance lacked the firm strength that might be read in hers. His slim, graceful, stripling figure was gorgeously arrayed in a kilted tunic of gold brocade, with long, green, deeply foliated sleeves. the ends of which reached almost to his toes. His girdle was of hammered gold, whence hung a poniard with a jewelled hilt, and a ruby glowed in his bulging cap of green silk. One of his legs was cased in green, the other in yellow, and he wore a green shoe on the yellow foot, and a yellow on the green. This, in the 16th year of his age, was the Lord Gian Giacomo Paleologo, sovereign Marquess of Montferrat. His two male companions were Messer Corsario, his tutor, a foxy-faced man of 30, whose rich purple gown would have been more proper to a courtier than a pedant, and the Lord Castruccio da Fenestrella, a young man of perhaps 25, very gorgeous in a scarlet houppelande, and not unhandsome, despite his pallid cheeks, thin lank hair, and rather shifty eyes. It was upon him that Giacomo now turned in peevishness. "Do not laugh, Castruccio." Meanwhile, the captain was flinging out an arm in command to his followers. "Two of you search the enclosure yonder about the gate. Beat up the hedges. Two of you with me." He swung to the lady before she could answer her brother. "You have seen no one, Highness?" Her Highness was guilty of an evasion. "Shall I not tell you if I had? Yet a man certainly entered here not many minutes since by the garden door." "You saw him enter?" "I saw clear signs that he had entered." "Signs? What signs?" He told her. Her mobile lips expressed a doubt before she uttered it. "A poor warrant that for this intrusion, Sir Bernardo." The captain grew uncomfortable. "Highness, you mistake my motives." "I hope I do," she answered lightly, and turned her shoulder to him. He commanded his two waiting followers, the others were already in the enclosed garden, to the temple. At that she turned again, her eyes indignant. "Without my leave? The temple, sir, is my own private bower." The captain hesitated, ill at ease. "Hardly at present, Highness. It is in the hands of the workmen, and this fellow may be hiding there." "He is not. He could not be in the temple without my knowledge. I am but come from there." "Your memory, Highness, is at fault. As I approached, you were coming along the terrace from the enclosed garden." She flushed under the correction, and there was a pause before she slowly answered him. "Your eyes are too good, Bernardo." In a tone that made him change countenance, she added, "I shall remember it, together with your reluctance to accept my word." Contemptuously she dismissed him. "Pray, make your search without regard for me." The captain stood a moment hesitating. Then he bowed stiffly from the hips, tossed his head in silent command to his men, and so led them off over the marble bridge. After he had drawn blank, like the soldiers he had sent to search the enclosure, he returned, baffled, with his four fellows at his heels. The Princess Valeria wandered now in company with those other gay ones along the terrace by the balustrade. "You come empty-handed, then?" she rallied him. "I'll stake my life he entered the garden," said the captain sullenly. "You are wise in staking something of no value." He disregarded alike the taunt and the titter it drew from her companions. "I must report to His Highness. Do you say positively, Madonna, that you did not see this fellow?" "Lord man, do you still presume to question me? Besides, if you're so confident, why waste time in questions? Continue your search." The captain addressed himself to her companions. "You, sirs and ladies, did you have no glimpse of this knave, a tall youngster dressed in green?" "In green?" cried the Lady Valeria. "Now that is interesting. In green? A dryad, perhaps? Or perhaps my brother here? The captain shook his head. That is not possible. Nor am I in green, added the young Marquis. Nor have I been outside the garden. She mocks you, Monsieur Bonabo. It is her cursed humour. We have seen no one. Nor you, Messer Corsario? Pointedly now the captain addressed the pedant, as by his years and office the likeliest to return him a serious answer. Indeed no, the gentleman replied. But then, he added, we were some way off, as you observed. Madonna, however, who was up here, asserts that she saw no one. Ah, but does she so assert it? The captain insisted. The Lady Valeria looked him over in chill disdain. You all heard what I said. Repetition is a weariness. You see, the captain appealed to them. Her brother came to his assistance. Why can't you answer plainly and have done, Valeria? Why must you forever remember to be witty? Why can't you just say no? Because I've answered plainly enough already, and my answer has been disregarded. Sir Bernardo shall have no opportunity to repeat an offence I am not likely to forget. She turned away. Come, dear Nara, and you, Assalta, it is growing chill. With the ladies obediently following her, she descended towards the lower gardens and the palace. Monsieur Bernardo stroked his chin, a man nonplussed. The Lord Castruccio chided him. You're a fool, Bernardo, to anger her highness. Besides, man, what mare's nest are you hunting? The soldier was pale with vexation. You saw as I did that, as we crossed the gardens, her highness was coming from that enclosure. Yes, booby, said Corsario, and we saw as you did that she came alone. If a man entered by that gate, as you say, he got no further than the enclosed garden, and this your men have searched already. You gain nothing by betraying suspicions. You, and what do you suppose this man? Suppose? I know. What do you know? That he is a rogue, a brigand scoundrel, associate of Lorenzaccio de Trino, who slipped through our fingers an hour ago. By the host, cried Corsario in genuine surprise. I thought... He checked abruptly and dissembled the break by a laugh. And can you dream that the Lady Valeria would harbour a robber? Can I dream? Can any man dream what the Lady Valeria will do? I could dream that she'll put your eyes out if ever the power is hers, lisped the Lord of Fenestrella, with the malice that was of his nature. You heard her say they are too good, and that she'll remember it. You should be less ready to tell her all you see. He is a fool who helps to make a woman wise. The Marquis laughed to applaud his friend's philosophy, and his glance approved him fawningly. The young soldier considered them. Sirs, I will resume my search. When they had searched until night closed in upon the world, investigating every hedge and bush that might afford concealment, the captain came to think that either he had been at fault in concluding that the fugitive had sought shelter in the garden, or else the rogue had found some way out, was now beyond their reach. He retired crestfallen, and the three gentlemen who had accompanied his search, and who did not conceal their amusement at its failure, went in to supper. And on that note of bad news for the poor captain, I'm going to call it a night. As always, if you want to pick up where I'm leaving off, you can find the original on Project Gutenberg at the link in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to follow or subscribe in whatever service you use, so that you get your new episodes whenever they come out. Good night, and sweet dreams.